The grand dining hall of the Lusaka estate glowed with chandeliers, but the air was heavy with tension. Isaac sat at the long polished mahogany table, his father at the head, surrounded by relatives who wore the kind of smiles that weren't smiles at all. Chief Mua slid a thick folder across the table, the papers inside crisp and cold. "Sign," he ordered, his voice carrying the weight of command. They all leaned forward, eyes glinting, certain Isaac would bow his head like he always did. His half-brother smirked, his stepmother whispered to another aunt, already imagining his humiliation. But Isaac did not reach for the pen. Instead, he opened his leather bag and placed a smaller, black folder on the table. His hand was calm, his eyes steady. For a moment no one moved. The silence stretched, broken only by the faint clink of a spoon against a glass. His father's brows tightened. "What is this?" he barked. Isaac leaned back, almost smiling. "My answer," he said quietly. A ripple of unease moved through the room. The relatives exchanged quick glances, the confidence draining from their faces. They had expected surrender, not defiance. Chief Mua slammed the table, but Isaac did not flinch. He simply slid his folder forward, his fingers resting lightly on it as if it held the sharpest weapon in the room. Nobody knew what was inside, but in that moment, the balance of power shifted, and every heartbeat around the table grew louder. The whispers started even before the food was cleared from the table. Isaac could hear them, though they thought he wasn't listening. "The outsider," one aunt muttered, her lips curling. Another cousin leaned close to his half-sister and whispered, "He doesn't belong here." The words floated across the grand dining hall like poison. His half-siblings smirked, trading looks filled with triumph, as if they had already seen the ending of tonight's drama. They believed it was going to be Isaac's downfall, that by the time this dinner was over he would be stripped of any pride he had left. One brother leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, whispering to the others, "He will sign. He always breaks." Their confidence grew with every word, their eyes sharp with mockery. Isaac sat still, his face calm, but inside he felt the weight of years of rejection pressing on him. He had grown up with their laughter behind his back, their constant reminder that he was not like them. He was the quiet shadow at family gatherings, the one who was tolerated but never embraced. They had always called him the mistake, the unwanted reminder of his father's past. They thought tonight would seal that story forever. But Isaac had come prepared. While they sneered, he remembered the nights he spent in silence, searching, digging, chasing whispers of the truth. What his relatives didn't know was that Isaac had already uncovered secrets far more dangerous than anything they could imagine. Secrets his father had buried for decades, secrets heavy enough to crush the proud faces now mocking him. He thought of the documents locked away, the report stamped and certified, the undeniable truth he carried like a hidden weapon. As they whispered, he watched them. His half-sister adjusting her diamond bracelet, smug in her mother's protection. His younger brother smirking as if he were already celebrating Isaac's shame. His stepmother sitting tall, her eyes glittering with malice. They had no idea their world was seconds from collapsing. Isaac felt a strange calm wash over him. For years he had carried their insults like scars. Tonight, those scars were about to turn into power. The family believed they were watching an outsider about to be crushed. In reality, they were standing at the edge of their own destruction. Isaac's silence was not weakness, it was the quiet before the storm. And when he finally spoke, when the black folder opened, it would not be Isaac who bowed his head in shame. It would be them. Every word whispered around the table only fueled him more. He let them laugh. He let them sneer. Because Isaac knew something they didn't, this was not his ending. It was theirs. And the secret he held in his hands would make sure of it. The room grew heavier when Chief Mua finally lost his patience. His deep voice shook the air as he barked at Isaac to sign the loan papers. "It is your duty to the family," he thundered, his hands slamming against the table. Every head turned toward Isaac, waiting for him to bow his head, to obey the man who had always treated his words as law. But Isaac did not move. He leaned back in his chair, calm as if the storm around him had nothing to do with him. His lips curved into the faintest smile, a smile that did not match the tension choking the room. It was the kind of smile that made people nervous because it meant something was hidden behind it. That small smile was enough to spark fire across the table. His half-brother muttered under his breath, "Look at him. He thinks he's better than us." His half-sister rolled her eyes and whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Ungrateful as always." His stepmother slammed her glass down and pointed at him, her voice sharp like a blade. "After everything this family has given you, this is how you repay us. You are nothing without this name. Nothing." The words echoed, filling the hall with venom. The others nodded, their whispers rising again, their sneers returning with fresh force. But Isaac stayed still. He didn't shout. He didn't defend himself. His calm made their anger grow wilder, as if they were screaming at a wall that refused to move. The silence after their insults was louder than their words. Chief Mua's face turned red, his eyes blazing, his finger stabbing at the papers again. "Sign it now, Isaac," he commanded, his voice shaking with rage. Isaac's hand finally moved, but not toward the loan papers. Slowly, carefully, he reached for the black folder he had placed on the table earlier. His fingers rested on it for a moment, steady and unshaken, before he slid it forward into the center of the table. The scrape of the folder against the polished wood was louder than all the whispers combined. Everyone froze. "What is this?" his father demanded, though his voice cracked slightly. Isaac's eyes met his father's for the first time that night. His expression was calm, almost gentle, but there was steel in his voice when he answered. "The truth." The family shifted uncomfortably, their confidence flickering. His stepmother narrowed her eyes, suspicion flashing across her face. His half-sibling stopped smirking. Something in Isaac's tone, in the steady way his hand lingered on the folder, told them this was not another argument they could laugh off. This was different. The room was so quiet now that even the ticking of the clock on the wall seemed too loud. All eyes were on the black folder. Isaac leaned back again, folding his arms, his calm smile returning. The game had changed, and everyone knew it. They just didn't know how badly it was about to end for them. When Isaac finally opened the black folder, the air in the dining hall seemed to stop moving. Every eye followed his hand as he pulled out a stack of papers and laid them flat on the shining table. For a moment no one spoke, but the tension was so thick it was almost choking. Isaac's voice was calm, almost too calm, when he said, "These are DNA results." His words dropped like stones into the silence. His half-brother let out a short laugh, but it cracked halfway, sounding more like fear than mockery. His stepmother leaned forward, her face stiff. "What nonsense is this?" she snapped. Isaac didn't even flinch. He tapped the documents with his finger and said, "Not nonsense. Proof." The lawyer sitting quietly at the end of the table cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. He had been silent until now, but when Isaac handed him one of the documents, he nodded firmly. "These results are certified. Authentic. Court-ready." His words rolled across the room like thunder. That was when Isaac revealed the truth, each sentence slicing through the family's pride. He was the only legitimate heir. The children his father favored so dearly, the ones who had mocked and sneered at him for years, were not even biologically his. The reaction was instant. Gasps filled the air. One aunt covered her mouth with her hand, eyes wide in shock. His half-sister's face went pale, the blood draining from her cheeks. His half-brother who had been smirking all evening suddenly looked like he couldn't breathe, his mouth opening and closing with no words coming out. The polished air of superiority that had hung around the table all evening shattered in an instant. Panic, raw and ugly, took its place. Chief Mua's hand shook as he reached for the papers, his eyes racing over the words he didn't want to believe. His face twisted in disbelief, then anger, then something darker, fear. The stepmother's voice rose above the silence, sharp and desperate. "This is a lie. He is trying to destroy this family." But even she couldn't hide the tremor in her voice. Everyone saw the way her hands trembled as she tried to grab the papers, only for Isaac to calmly pull them back. "No," Isaac said, his voice steady, unshaken. "This family destroyed itself with lies. I am only showing the truth." The words sank in, heavier than any insult ever thrown at him. The children who had once sneered at Isaac as the outsider were now staring at him with wide, terrified eyes. They were the outsiders now, stripped of the name they had used to humiliate him. The great dining hall, filled minutes ago with confidence and laughter, was now drowned in silence. Every proud face had crumbled. Every whispered insult had been burned away by one undeniable fact. Isaac had dropped a bombshell that none of them could escape, and with it, the entire balance of power in the family shifted forever. The lawyer's voice was steady, almost too calm, as he repeated that the DNA results were certified, sealed, and ready for court. His words landed like a hammer, smashing through the last pieces of denial around the table. Isaac's half-brother, the same one who had spent the evening smirking and whispering about Isaac being weak, suddenly found himself choking on his own words. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. His pride, so loud just moments ago, was gone. He stared at the papers as if they were a snake about to strike. His half-sister clutched her glass so tightly her knuckles turned white, her eyes darting around the room searching for someone, anyone, to save her from the truth. The grand dining hall, which had been filled with smug laughter and sharp whispers only minutes earlier, now sat in a silence so heavy it pressed against everyone's chest. No one dared move. Even the servants standing at the edges of the room kept their eyes low, afraid to be caught watching the collapse of a family that had always seemed untouchable. The clinking of silverware and the fake smiles that had decorated the dinner were gone. In their place was raw fear, thick and suffocating. At the head of the table, Chief Mua's hands trembled as he reached for the documents again. The powerful man who had always ruled with iron confidence suddenly looked fragile, his skin pale, his eyes unable to focus. The truth was written in black and white, and for the first time in his life, he had no control over it. His empire, his reputation, his carefully built legacy, it all sat crumbling in front of him with every word the lawyer confirmed. His lips parted, but no sound came out, only a shallow breath that betrayed the weight pressing down on him. Isaac leaned back in his chair, calm as ever, watching the mighty fall without raising his voice. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to gloat. The silence spoke louder than anything he could have said. The same family who had laughed at him, who had sneered and called him the outsider, were now staring at him with wide, frightened eyes. Their world had flipped, and they were powerless to stop it. The stepmother tried to speak, but her voice cracked, breaking apart like glass under pressure. This can't be true," she whispered, but the words sounded weak, empty, and she knew it. The lawyer's calm nod silenced her, and she sank back in her chair, her face twisted with panic. The collapse was complete. The walls that once echoed with authority and arrogance now trapped them in their own fear. And at the center of it all sat Isaac, steady and quiet, watching the power slip through their fingers and land in his. The empire they had tried to use against him was already gone, and they knew it. The silence in the room was already unbearable when Isaac's voice broke through it. Calm, steady, unhurried. "These papers aren't just here," he said, tapping the folder lightly with his finger. "Copies of this DNA report are already with the Board of Trustees, the bank, and the court." His words fell like thunder. Heads snapped toward him, eyes widening in shock. The family had thought they could shout him down, hide the truth, maybe even burn the papers in front of him. But Isaac had been 10 steps ahead. This wasn't just a secret he could be bullied into burying. It was already out of their control. His half-brother slammed his hand on the table, his face red, his voice shaking. "You wouldn't dare. But his outburst sounded hollow, like a desperate man clinging to sinking ground. Isaac didn't even look at him. "It's already done," he said simply. The lawyer nodded in quiet agreement, confirming that the documents had indeed been filed and shared with people who mattered. There was no escape. Gasps spread around the table. His half-sister grabbed her stepmother's hand under the table, her diamond bracelet clinking as her fingers trembled. The proud stepmother, who had always worn her authority like a crown, leaned back with wide eyes. Her face, once filled with arrogance, was now pale with fear. She opened her mouth to speak but closed it again, realizing no words could undo what Isaac had just revealed. Chief Mua's breathing grew heavy. He had always been the man in control, the man who commanded respect with a single look. But now he looked like a shadow of himself, his hands shaking as if the weight of his empire was pressing down on him all at once. He understood what the others didn't dare say aloud: this wasn't just a family embarrassment. This was the kind of truth that could ruin reputations, sink businesses, and stain the family name beyond repair. The relatives who had mocked Isaac just minutes ago were now whispering frantically to each other, their smugness turned to panic. "The trustees, the bank," one muttered, his voice breaking. They all understood what it meant. Isaac hadn't just defended himself. He had pulled the rug out from under the very foundation of their lives. Isaac remained calm, his voice steady. "You thought I would always stay silent. You thought you could use me as your scapegoat. But the truth is not locked in this room anymore. The truth is out there, and nothing you do can hide it now." The weight of his words settled over the room like a storm cloud. The carefully constructed lies that had propped up their pride were collapsing in real time. Their power, their wealth, their legacy, everything they had clung to, was slipping away because of one black folder and the man they had spent years trying to push aside. And the most terrifying part was that they knew it was only the beginning. The moment Isaac's words sank in, chaos cracked through the silence. His stepmother, her face twisted with desperation, lunged across the table, her jeweled hands reaching for the black folder as if grabbing it could erase everything it carried. But Isaac was faster. He slid the folder back calmly, his eyes never leaving hers. She froze, her fingers trembling inches from the papers, and for the first time, the woman who had always looked at him with cold superiority looked small. Around the table, the rest of the family shifted uneasily, their whispers returning, but this time they were laced with panic instead of mockery. Isaac pushed his chair back and stood. The scrape of the chair against the floor cut through the noise like a blade. He didn't shout, didn't raise his voice. He simply spoke, steady and clear. "I am done being your scapegoat," he said. The words echoed in the hall, stronger than any insult they had ever thrown at him. For years they had treated him as the outsider, the mistake, the shadow that didn't belong. But now he stood tall, and every eye in the room followed him. The power had shifted, and they knew it. His half-brother, pale and shaken, tried to mutter something about fixing this, but the words stumbled out weak and broken. His half-sister's eyes welled with tears as she shook her head, refusing to believe the nightmare unraveling before her. Chief Mua sat frozen, his authority shattered, his hands still trembling as he stared at the table. The man who had demanded obedience could not find a single command now. Isaac looked at them one last time, his calm smile returning, but this time it wasn't the smile of someone hiding pain. It was the smile of a man finally free. He gave a small nod, almost polite, then turned and walked away from the table. His footsteps echoed against the marble floor, each one sounding like a closing door. No one dared stop him. No one could. Behind him, panic erupted. Voices rose in frantic whispers, chairs scraped as relatives huddled together, their arrogance replaced by fear. The stepmother hissed at her children to stay calm, though her shaking hands betrayed her. The siblings who once laughed at Isaac were now clinging to each other, terrified of the storm they all knew was about to break outside those walls. The family that had prided itself on control and superiority was now left scrambling, humiliated and powerless. Isaac did not look back. For the first time, he walked out of that dining hall without the weight of their judgment on his shoulders. The folder wasn't just paper. It was a weapon of truth that had set him free and left them trapped in their lies. And as the heavy doors closed behind him, the empire they had built on deceit began to collapse, piece by piece, while Isaac stepped calmly into the night, no longer their victim, but their reckoning. The night ended in chaos, but the morning brought a storm no one in the family could escape. Before the sun had even risen high, phones began ringing endlessly. Calls came from the board of trustees, from the bank, from old family allies who had seen the reports Isaac had already sent out. The truth had spread like fire, and with it, the empire that Chief Mua had ruled for decades shifted its weight onto new shoulders. For the first time in his life, Isaac's name was no longer whispered with shame but spoken with authority. The outsider had become the center, and the power that had always been denied to him now rested fully in his hands. Relatives who had mocked him only hours earlier were the first to call. His half-brother, the same one who had sneered across the dinner table, now spoke with a shaky voice, asking if they could talk things over. His half-sister, who had rolled her eyes at him for years, sent desperate messages, trying to remind him that they were family. Even his stepmother, whose venom had been sharp enough to cut glass, reached out with a trembling tone, pleading that the truth didn't have to destroy them all. Each call carried the same fear, the same desperation. They had built their lives on arrogance, and now they were begging the very man they had tried to crush for mercy. Isaac listened, but he did not forget. Their voices took him back to every moment they had laughed at him, every insult that had cut into him like a blade, every cold look that reminded him he did not belong. He remembered standing in the shadows while they sat at the head of the table, remembered being treated like a mistake in his own home. Those memories were still sharp, and now they burned brighter with every plea for forgiveness that reached his ears. Instead of anger, Isaac felt something else, a quiet satisfaction. He didn't scream, didn't curse them. He didn't need to. The balance of power had shifted, and it was clear to everyone. For the first time, they needed him more than he needed them. The empire they had used to humiliate him was now his, and they could do nothing but wait for his decision. Isaac stood by the window of his study, phone in his hand, watching the morning light spill over the Lusaka estate. He let the calls keep coming, his phone buzzing with names of relatives who had never once treated him with kindness. And then he smiled. Not the bitter smile of a man seeking revenge, but the calm smile of someone who had finally been set free. The same family who once pushed him aside now bowed to him in desperation. The outsider had become the heir, and there was no turning back. The irony of it all was almost too perfect. The very same people who once told Isaac he did not deserve a place at their dining table were now begging for a seat in his boardroom. Just days earlier, they had laughed at him, called him the outsider, mocked him for being different. Now, with the DNA results exposed and the empire shaken to its core, those same voices trembled with desperation. They sent messages, made calls, and even showed up at his office gates, their faces pale, their confidence gone. They no longer spoke with arrogance, their words dripped with fear and pleading. They asked for forgiveness, for second chances, for mercy. They were no longer rulers of their world, they were beggars knocking at the door of the man they had tried to destroy. But Isaac was no fool. He knew their sudden kindness was not love, but survival. He listened to them, but he did not forget the years of humiliation. He remembered the nights when he ate alone while they laughed together, the sharp sting of being called unwanted, the heavy silence when he walked into a room and they pretended he wasn't there. Every insult, every cruel smirk, every rejection had built the fire inside him. And now, that fire was his strength. He sat at the head of his new boardroom table, the place they swore he would never reach, and watched them squirm in front of him. The polished confidence they once carried was gone, replaced with nervous fidgeting and hollow smiles. They wanted to act as though nothing had happened, but Isaac refused to let their lies continue. "This seat," he said quietly, his voice steady and firm, "was never yours to give or take. It was always mine." The room went silent. His words cut deeper than anger could. Isaac was not just holding power, he was rewriting the family's legacy. For years, the Mua name had been built on lies and shadows, but Isaac chose to build it on truth. His weapon was not revenge, but exposure. Every deal he made, every step he took now was rooted in honesty, the very thing they had tried to bury. And that was the true justice. Because while they clung to the past, trying desperately to keep their crowns, Isaac was shaping a future they could never control. It was poetic justice. The so-called outsider had become the heir, the leader, the man everyone now depended on. The ones who had mocked him now bowed their heads in his presence. The ones who told him he would never belong were now desperate just to be near him. Isaac did not need to shout or boast. His calm, steady presence was enough to remind them of the truth: he had won, not by becoming like them, but by standing firm in who he was. And that truth was a victory they could never take away. The office was quiet, so quiet that Isaac could hear the soft tick of the clock on the wall. Morning light poured through the wide windows, spilling across the polished desk where the black folder rested. He reached for it slowly, his fingers brushing against the cover, the same folder that had turned his world upside down. He opened it one last time, his eyes tracing the words he already knew by heart. But this time, he didn't see it as evidence. He saw it as freedom. The pages were more than DNA results, they were the key that had unlocked chains he had carried his whole life. He leaned back in his chair, breathing deeply, remembering that night in the dining hall. His father's stern face, the folder of loan papers shoved in front of him, the smug laughter of his half-siblings. They had all believed that would be the moment Isaac was crushed, forced into silence once again. But the truth had flipped the table. What his father thought would end Isaac's freedom had ended the empire he worked his whole life to protect. Now the mighty house of Mua was shaken, its walls crumbling under the weight of lies. The family that once mocked him was begging for mercy. And Isaac, calm and steady, finally sat in the seat they swore he would never reach. He closed the folder gently, slid it into the drawer, and smiled. It no longer controlled him. It had done its work. The chapter was closed. The night his father tried to chain him had instead broken the chains forever. One folder, one truth, had shut down the room and rewritten the story. And Isaac, at last, was free.